Daniel was only 10 when his mother first warned him. She lay propped up on the couch, wrapped in a thick quilt despite the summer heat. Dark circles rested under her eyes, and the flickering light from the television made her look even more exhausted than she already was. The sound was low, some old crime drama droning in the background, while Daniel sat on the floor, drawing shapes in the carpet with his fingers. "You've got my mind, Danny," she murmured, her voice rough with fatigue. "That means it's going to be hard for you to sleep when you get older." He looked up at her from the dark glow of the TV. "Why?" She sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Because some people don't get to shut off. Their brains keep running, thinking, remembering, worrying. Your body can be exhausted by your mind." She tapped the side of her head. "Your mind doesn't care. It just keeps going. Some nights, it's like I'm stuck in my own head, watching the hours crawl by. And you've got my mind, Danny." He thought about that, about the nights he already spent tossing and turning, about the weird, half-awake thoughts that drifted in and out of his head like ghosts. "Will it get better?" he asked. His mother gave a tired smile. "No, sweetheart, I'm sorry, but it gets worse." Daniel Cole stood in the middle of his new apartment, surrounded by neatly stacked boxes and the promise of a fresh start. The place was small, but enough for one person. The walls were plain, the kitchen old but functional. Most importantly, the living room had a street-facing window with a view of a quiet suburban neighborhood. The glow of porch lights dotted the street, and cars were parked neatly in their driveways. It felt peaceful. He hoped that feeling would last. Daniel set his hands on his hips, exhaling. The move to Fayetteville, Arkansas had been a deliberate one. After finishing his contract with the Army, he needed something stable, something where his skills could actually help people. Working at the VA hospital seemed like the right fit. It was meaningful work. It was a new start. But first, he had to get used to this place. He kicked off his boots and flopped onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The weight of exhaustion was there. His body wanted sleep, but his mind was already racing. New environment, new job. What if he overslept? What if the VA was a bad fit? Did he lock the front door? Was the fridge humming or something else? Daniel rubbed his face. Damn it. The same problem, just a different city. Rolling onto his side, he glanced at the street-facing window. The blinds were still open, revealing a perfect view of the neighborhood. Most of the houses were dark now, their occupants already deep in sleep. Normal people. People who could close their eyes and just disappear into unconsciousness without a fight. Lucky them, he sighed, pushing himself up to shut the blinds. But as his hand reached for the cord, something moved on the street below. He froze. A figure, a dark shape, lingered near one of the houses across the street. No flashlight, no reflective clothing, just standing there, barely distinguishable from the shadows themselves. Daniel blinked and leaned in slightly. Was someone really out this late? But the moment his eyes tried to focus, it was gone. Maybe it was nothing. The long day, the stress of the move, it was catching up with him. His brain was wired to overanalyze, to keep him awake with unnecessary thoughts. This was no different. Shaking his head, he pulled the blinds shut. He needed sleep. Tomorrow was a big day. Daniel's eyes cracked open to a dark ceiling. He wasn't sure what time it was, but the stillness told him it was the dead of night. His body felt heavy, his limbs sluggish, but his bladder refused to let him sleep any longer. With a groggy sigh, he sat up, rubbing his face before pushing off the couch. His bed still wasn't set up. He'd spent most of yesterday unpacking the essentials, leaving the furniture for later. For now, the couch would do. Shuffling toward the bathroom, he squinted at the microwave clock as he passed the kitchen. 3:14 a.m. Witching hour. Typical, he muttered to himself. After using the bathroom, he grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with tap water. He drank it slowly, his gaze wandering toward the large living room window overlooking the street. Without thinking, he walked closer, peering through the blinds. At first, he saw nothing but dimly lit houses, parked cars, and the occasional flicker of a porch light. Then, something shifted. A shadow, tall, thin, moved across the street. Daniel blinked and rubbed his eyes. The figure had no distinct features, just a solid black silhouette drifting between houses. His pulse picked up, but before he could get a better look, it was gone. He exhaled sharply. God, I'm exhausted. Shaking his head, he dumped the rest of his water down the drain and set the glass in the sink before heading back to the couch. He'd worked himself up for nothing. New place, new surroundings. It's just my brain playing tricks on me. Sleep eventually found him again. The next morning, Daniel pulled into the Shawnee Veterans Affairs Medical Center parking lot, gripping a fresh cup of coffee. His new job as a Veteran Services Assistant was straightforward, helping vets navigate benefits, scheduling appointments, and processing claims. Nothing glamorous, but it was a stable position and a fresh start. The day went as expected. Introductions, paperwork, training modules. He met a few coworkers and got a feel for the layout. By the time he clocked out, his brain was fried. As he drove back to his apartment, he spotted his neighbor, a middle-aged but older man, standing by his car in the lot. Daniel slowed, rolling down his window. "Everything all right?" The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "Damn battery's dead. Was working fine yesterday." Daniel frowned, a weird unease settling in his stomach. He thought about what he'd seen last night, the dark figure lingering near the cars. Coincidence. Had to be. Still, as Daniel pulled into his usual spot to go out, he cast one last glance at the neighbor's car. Something about this felt off. But for now, he ignored it. Daniel barely remembered falling asleep. The ache in his shoulders from the VA shift still clung to him, the weight of adjusting to a new schedule making it harder to wind down. But at some point, exhaustion had won. His body had given in. Then he woke up. His mind stirred first, half conscious, aware of the darkness around him. His body, though, remained still, stuck. Something was wrong. His chest felt heavy. A pressure pinned him down like an unseen weight pressing against his ribs. His fingers twitched, but the rest of him refused to move. A strange, static hum filled the silence of the living room, an almost imperceptible buzz that made the air feel thick, suffocating. And then he saw them. Two piercing, yellow eyes. They hovered in the farthest corner of the living room, just below the ceiling where the shadows deepened. They weren't glowing, not really, but they burned, cold and predatory, staring at him with an awareness that turned his blood to ice. Daniel tried to breathe, but his chest barely rose. He tried to move, to reach for the lamp on the couch end table, but his limbs refused to obey. His pulse pounded against his temples, frantic. The eyes didn't blink. A jagged, looming shape stretched behind them, tall and unnatural, though the shadows swallowed most of it. The outline of a wide-brimmed hat was barely visible against the darkness. Then, movement. It took a step forward. The pressure increased, squeezing the breath from Daniel's lungs. His vision blurred, his ears filled with the phantom hum. His fingers twitched. Desperation surged through him. With every ounce of willpower he had, he forced his hand to move. His fingers hit the switch on the lamp. Light flooded the room. Nothing was there. Daniel sat up, gasping, the weight on his chest instantly gone. His body trembled as he stared at the empty corner, his breath uneven. He swallowed hard, rubbing his face, trying to shake the lingering feeling of being watched. Sleep paralysis, he muttered to himself. He had read about it before. The body waking up while still trapped in the sleep cycle. The hallucinations were just a side effect of the mind not fully catching up. That's all it was. But the way those yellow eyes had looked at him. Daniel exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. He grabbed his phone. 3:12 a.m. No chance of getting any decent sleep now. With a groan, he threw off the blankets and dragged himself to the kitchen for some water. Maybe tomorrow he'd finally get his bed frame put together. Maybe getting his room set up properly would help him settle in, make things feel normal. The next day, work passed in a blur. Daniel focused on routine, patience, paperwork, the quiet sterility of the VA center. By the time his shift ended, the night before him felt like a distant bad dream. He picked up a coffee on the way home, deciding to finally assemble his bed frame. He wasn't about to deal with another night of restless sleep and weird nightmares on the couch. By the time the bed was set up, exhaustion clung to him again. He tossed his sheets over the mattress, climbed in, and let out a deep sigh. Tonight will be different, he told himself. But as he reached to turn off the lamp, his gaze drifted, just for a second, toward the corner of the bedroom. It was empty. But still, something inside him whispered, "Not for long." Daniel woke up before his alarm, again. The clock on his phone read 4:47 a.m. Too early to be useful, too late to fall back asleep. He exhaled through his nose, rubbing the sleep from his face as he sat up. At least he felt more rested than the night before. No sleep paralysis. No yellow eyes. No thing lurking in his room. Just a dreamless, heavy sleep. Still, a restless feeling gnawed at him. He dragged himself to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, then, out of habit, stepped toward the front window. The street outside was quiet, bathed in the soft amber glow of the streetlights. Most of the neighbors were still asleep, but something moved. Daniel squinted, pressing a hand against the window frame. A shadow slipped along the pavement, fluid and unnatural, like ink spreading across water. It wasn't a person. The thing drifted low, almost slithering, before sliding beneath an old sedan parked across the street. Daniel recognized the car. It belonged to the older man from next door, the one he'd exchanged a polite nod and concern over the man's car troubles the other day. The shadow figure hesitated under the car, lingering. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it melted into the darkness, disappearing from view. Daniel's skin crawled. For several moments, he just stood there, heart pounding in his chest. every rational thought in his brain trying to convince him that he was overtired, that the dim light was playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew better. Something was under that car, and whatever it was, it had left its mark. By morning, Daniel had almost convinced himself not to say anything. Almost. He was locking up his apartment, coffee in hand, when he spotted the old man heading toward his car. He was dressed for work, moving at a steady but tired pace, fishing his keys from his coat pocket. Daniel hesitated. This was stupid, wasn't it? What was he supposed to say? Hey, I saw a shadow creature crawl under your car last night. You might want to check it for curses or whatever. Instead, he jogged across the street. Hey, excuse me, sir. The man looked up, blinking. His face was lined with age, but his expression was sharp, wary of the sudden approach. Then he recognized Daniel. Well, hello again, young man. Daniel forced an easy smile. Sorry, I don't mean to bother you, but last night, I noticed someone messing around under your car. The old man frowned, glancing toward the sedan. Under my car? Yeah, real late. I couldn't see much, but I'd figured I'd let you know in case something was messed with. The man sighed. Damn kids, he muttered, shaking his head. But despite the annoyance in his voice, he knelt down, peering beneath the vehicle. Daniel stayed quiet, hand in pocket. A long pause. Then, the old man stood up, grumbling. Doesn't look like anything's missing. He gave Daniel a tired nod. Thanks for the heads up, son. Daniel nodded back. No problem. Just figured I'd... The car door slammed shut. Daniel turned just in time to see the old man in the driver's seat, fumbling with his seatbelt. The engine coughed, then turned over. The sedan rolled forward a few feet, and then panic. The man's hand jerked at the wheel, his mouth moving in silent alarm, his foot slamming against the floor. The car didn't stop. Through the windshield, Daniel saw the man's face twist with fear, his hands pulling uselessly at the parking brake. His brakes weren't working. Daniel didn't think, he just moved. As the car rolled forward, picking up momentum toward the quiet street, Daniel darted in front of it, pressing his hands flat against the hood. The impact jolted through his arms, but he planted his feet, pushing against the slow-moving weight of the sedan. It wasn't going fast, just rolling. But without brakes, it wasn't stopping either. The old man's voice cracked. Jesus! Put it in park! Daniel yelled. A beat. Then, a frantic shift of the gear stick. The car jerked, the tires grinding against the pavement before coming to a full stop. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The old man was breathing hard, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. Daniel swallowed, stepping back, his pulse thundering in his ears. You okay? He asked, voice hoarse. The man nodded, still shaken. He sat there for a few seconds before finally muttering, Damn thing! Wasn't responding! Daniel glanced down at the front of the car, the weight of realization settling in his gut. The thing he had seen last night, the shadow slipping under the vehicle, it hadn't just vanished, it had done something. And if Daniel hadn't said anything, he clenched his jaw, stepping away as the man exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. Guess I should get this thing checked out. Daniel forced a nod, his mind still reeling. Yeah, you probably should. Sorry about the coffee. Let me get you another one. Don't worry about it. I'll get another on my way to work. Just glad you're okay. How about an IOU then? Daniel smiled and nodded. As he turned to walk away, A single thought echoed in his head. This wasn't a coincidence. Not anymore. Friday night. Daniel was exhausted, but sleep had become something he no longer expected. He sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop illuminating the cluttered surface. An empty energy drink can, his phone, a VA pamphlet he'd meant to read but never did. Outside, the occasional car rumbled down the street, and the hum of a distant train cut through the night. It was after midnight when he finally stood, stretching, and moved toward the window. It had become a habit, looking out, scanning the neighborhood without really knowing why. Then he saw it, another shadow figure. This one moved differently than the others, deliberate, with a sense of purpose. It was hunched over, shifting between the vehicles in a neighbor's driveway before stopping near the back porch. It crouched low, barely distinguishable from the darkness, but Daniel could see the faint outline of a propane grill. The thing wasn't just passing through, it was doing something. He leaned in, watching as the shadow's fingers curled around the grill's control knobs. It held itself unnaturally still for a long moment before backing away, melting into the darkness of the alley behind the houses. Daniel blinked. It was gone. His pulse drummed in his ears. It had done something to that grill. No brakes. The thought hit him like a slap. No brakes on the old man's car. This was the second time. He swallowed hard, dragging a hand through his hair. If I don't do something. It was too late to bother anyone now, but first thing in the morning. The sun was barely up when Daniel stepped outside, the cool morning air biting at his skin. The neighborhood was still, save for the occasional dog barking in the distance. He made his way toward the house, rehearsing what he'd say. How do you tell someone their grill might kill them? As he reached the driveway, the front door opened, and the man in his 40s stepped out, stretching with a yawn, before reaching down to grab the morning paper. He was wearing a faded band t-shirt and plaid pajamas, his hair a mess. Daniel cleared his throat. Hey, morning. The guy blinked at him. Hey. Daniel gestured toward the grill. I noticed something last night. There was someone messing with your grill. The man frowned. What? I don't know who, but they were at it for a while. The guy groaned. Damn teenagers. I swear, this neighborhood's going to shit. He shook his head and walked over to the grill, reaching for the lid. Daniel stopped him. Wait. But the guy had already turned the knob. A loud hiss filled the air. The man's eyes widened. He yanked his hand back. Jesus! The gas was on! Daniel exhaled slowly. Yeah, figured it was worth checking. The guy let out a low whistle. Damn, man. If I'd lit that? He ran a hand over his face. That could have been real bad. Daniel forced a tight smile. Glad I caught it. The man clapped a hand on his shoulder. I owe you a beer. Seriously. Daniel just nodded, but his stomach was twisting. That was two. 2 times he'd seen them. 2 times he'd intervened. This wasn't random, and he had a feeling that whatever was behind those shadows knew it too. That night was thick with silence, the kind that felt heavier after a long week. Daniel laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind cycling through the day's events. He had saved someone, again. 2 times now, he had seen a shadow figure just before something dangerous happened. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing either. He exhaled and turned on his side, shutting his eyes. Maybe sleep would finally come easy tonight. A knock. Daniel's eyes snapped open. Not a real knock. Nothing at the door. This was different. A dull thump rattled deep in his chest, as if something unseen had tapped against his ribcage from the inside. His breath slowed, his senses sharpening in the darkness. His body was still, but his instincts weren't. Something felt off. His eyes drifted toward the window. A figure stood on the sidewalk, not moving, not shifting, just watching. Daniel had seen plenty of shadow figures before, slipping in and out of places like thieves in the night. But this one wasn't moving. It was waiting. His pulse kicked up as his eyes adjusted, pulling details from the darkness. It was taller than the others, its form sharper against the dim glow of the street lamp. The hat on its head cast a long, unnatural shadow across its face. But it didn't need a face, because Daniel could see them. 2 yellow eyes, burning, unblinking, fixed on him. Daniel's breath hitched. He knew those eyes. The feeling that crawled up his spine wasn't fear. Not entirely. It was recognition. The figure didn't move, didn't react. Then, it was gone. Daniel sat up, his heart hammering. He rubbed his face, exhaling shakily, and glanced back at the empty sidewalk. Had he fallen asleep and dreamed it? Had his exhaustion finally caught up to him? He swallowed and looked at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. No, he was awake, and something out there had been watching him. Daniel sat in front of his laptop, the dim glow of the screen casting long shadows across the cluttered desk. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. What exactly was he searching for? He didn't even know where to begin. The incidents, the brake failure, the propane tank. They weren't just accidents. He had seen something both nights. And then there were the eyes. Those piercing yellow orbs staring at him from the corner of his room during the episode of sleep paralysis. Finally, he typed, "Shadow figures watching at night." Hundreds of results popped up. Forums, personal experiences, even scientific explanations for sleep paralysis. But one name kept appearing over and over again, in hushed, terrified discussions. The Hat Man. Daniel clicked on the thread titled, "The Hat Man. Has anyone seen him twice?" I've seen him since I was a kid. He doesn't just watch, he commands the other shadow figures. If he comes close, you're in real trouble. Don't let him touch you. Don't let him linger. If you see him, ignore him. Whatever you do, don't acknowledge him. Daniel's pulse quickened as he scrolled through similar accounts. The Hat Man wasn't just a common figure in sleep paralysis. He was different. He had intent. Some said he was an omen of death. Others believed he was drawn to those who could see beyond the veil of the ordinary world. His breathing quickened. The first time he saw those yellow eyes, he had been paralyzed, helpless. But what if he hadn't been? What if? Daniel exhaled sharply and rubbed his face. He needed air. The air outside was thick with humidity, heavy with the promise of rain. Daniel stepped onto his balcony, his mind still buzzing with everything he had read. He looked down the street, scanning the houses, the parked cars, the empty sidewalk. And then he saw him. A figure stood beneath the street lamp across the road, tall and unnaturally still. A long trench coat draped over his form, and on his head sat a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face into darkness. But Daniel didn't need to see his face. He saw the eyes. 2 gleaming yellow orbs locked onto him from beneath the hat, burning with something ancient and knowing. Daniel's breath hitched. His entire body tensed. Every instinct screamed at him to look away, but he didn't. The Hat Man remained motionless, waiting. Then, without a single movement, he just vanished. Not a step taken, not a shift in the air. Just gone, swallowed by the shadows. Something told him tonight wasn't over. Daniel was exhausted by the time he finally laid in bed. The encounter outside had left him rattled, but he couldn't afford to let paranoia win. He had work tomorrow. He turned off the bedside lamp and closed his eyes. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. He wasn't sure. Then, the pressure started. His limbs felt like lead. His chest locked in place. His breathing shallow. His eyes flicked open, darting around the room. And he saw them. The yellow eyes. They burned from the corner of the room, where the shadows stretched impossibly long, twisting unnaturally toward his bed. The figure stood there, watching. The Hat Man. He was close this time. A voice, low, distorted, wrong, rumbled through the room, though the Hat Man's mouth never moved.
Stop interfering.
Daniel's heart pounded.
You are not meant to see.
The shadows around the Hat Man thickened, curling like tendrils, inching toward the bed. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This was sleep paralysis. He knew that, but this was different. It felt different. Then, something snapped inside him. The fear was there, but so was something else. A challenge. Daniel forced his fingers to move. His hand twitched. His foot shifted beneath the blanket. The paralysis wasn't absolute. And then he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up, his breathing shaking but steady. His feet touched the cold floor, and he stood up. The Hat Man flinched. The yellow eyes widened, ever so slightly. The first crack in his mask of control. Daniel took a step forward. The darkness around the Hat Man recoiled. Another step. The Hat Man stepped back. Daniel's voice was hoarse but firm. You don't belong here. For the first time, the Hat Man broke eye contact. Then, without a word, he sank, vanishing into the floor, swallowed by the very shadows that birthed him. Daniel was alone. Dawn painted the sky in muted shades of gray as Daniel sat at his desk once more, hours before work, staring at the search results still open on his laptop. The Hat Man had been surprised. That meant something. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his hands together to stop their trembling. His insomnia had always felt like a curse, an endless cycle of sleepless nights, exhaustion, and frustration. But now he knew the truth. He wasn't just an insomniac. He was a watcher. And something told him the Hat Man wasn't done with him yet. Insomnia isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's a warning. A nudge to open your eyes when the rest of the world is blind. The question is, are you losing sleep for no reason? Or because something wants you awake? Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening. This is another tale of something that affects me personally. Yes, I'm talking about insomnia. And to answer any question that anybody would ever have, yes, I've experienced night paralysis and I have been able to break it. Have I seen anything during that time? No, I really haven't. The part of the story that really hits close to home is the beginning, because that actually did happen. That conversation did happen between me and my mom. And now that I'm at the age where she was when she told me, I fully understand now. So this was very, very important for the AI to get right. So when I was doing the brainstorming, giving the prompts, the parameters, and all the information I could about this, I needed it to be right. So I put a lot of energy into the final draft before I started recording. And I'd like to know in the comments, do you suffer from insomnia? Have you had things like night terrors or sleep paralysis? Let me know, because I'm sure that would be very interesting and very fun to hear about. And I think it's very therapeutic to share that with others who have the same problems. Okay, I'm on YouTube as well as Rumble, so you can find me on both sites. And I have a Buy Me a Coffee link. Any contributions would be appreciated. And always don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe. That's the lifeblood of us creators, our channels. So please share the story with others as I am sharing it with you. And as always, it's okay to be scared. I am too. Embrace the strange. Embrace creativity. Embrace your confidence. And I will see you in the next story.